Hey, gang, this is Andy over at Falco Canine Academy. Thank you for joining me. I am here from the Falco Canine Academy studios in Brea, California. And we're going to be talking about something that can be very controversial depending on, I guess, your point of view and your training style and that kind of thing. So just understand that we're going to be addressing a lot of issues. We're going to be going over all of, I guess, both my belief system and what I've experienced over the last several years in my training. Oh, I'm seeing some comments down here. They came in. Great. Just when class starts. We have an e-collar board and train that we are going to bring to class today. So this is Gina. This is one of my trainers over at Falco Canine Orange County. And she's a fantastic trainer, by the way. And they're starting class. I knew when I set that up that I was setting it up, unfortunately, at the time the class starts. But the replay will be there. If you want to have people play it while they're there on their breaks, and they can watch it on their phones. Hey, Paul, glad to see you. Paul and I were police officers together at Anaheim. He now, are you chief of police over where you're at? I forget what city you are now, but Paul is a great guy. Had great times working with him out in the hills, Anaheim Hills, in the canyon, doing a lot of good police work out there, which we actually at times had to find police work to do out in Anaheim Hills back in the day because there wasn't a lot going on in that area. But there was one area in particular called Temple Street that we were very busy on. So, all right. So we're going to be talking about this e-collar thing. And I know it's probably more controversial than the pinch collar broadcast that I did not too long ago. Oops, I forgot to change this back to the one I wanted here. And so we're going to be talking about this thing right here. Now, there's two types of electronic collars that we're going to be talking about. I'm going to talk about bark collars for just a moment in this discussion, and then we're going to go to the remote type of electronic collar. Of course, there's other collars like digital fences and things like that, but some of the information that we're going to be talking about actually covers all of those things. But we're going to be talking more about the remote collars, probably more than anything else, and what I like and don't like. Oh, Park Ranger, Springfield, Missouri. Oh, fantastic. Right? That's even better. As a matter of fact, I've thought about doing something like that myself, moving to a smaller town in another part of the United States. I'm talking about what Paul Byers' comment here. And so, I've been looking at some of those things back in my past, but things are going really well now. I don't have to work as hard as you, Paul, right now. So I'm sure you're doing a great job out there. And so I like to do things simple and easy as I possibly can. The one thing I do have going on right now is I'm traveling a great deal. Next week, I have to go to Minnesota and just kind of all over the planet. So, all right, let's get to first, what an electronic collar. Well, first, let's answer the question. Is the electronic collar cruel and unusual punishment for a dog? And the answer is, unfortunately, that people don't like this answer, but the answer is yes and no. Just like anything else, it can be a horrible tool used in the wrong manner and used by the wrong person with the wrong intent, right? And so, yes, it can be a horrible tool for a dog when used in that manner. In other cases, I actually had a CD back in the day that I had for sale called Electronic Collar, the Most Humane Way of Training a Dog. So, so it can be. I'm here in the same moment. I've said it's the worst and most horrible tool, and yet on the other way, it can be actually the most humane tool that you can use, including those people that really like to use food. And I'm going to get into that in just a little bit. But let's first talk about. I'm going to share my screen here, and I'm going to show you first back to what we were talking about the other day in regard to operant conditioning. And that's simply put, the e-collar falls into this type of training. Operant conditioning is a type of learning where behavior is controlled by consequences. Key concepts in operant conditioning are positive reinforcement, which is the reward, negative reinforcement, which is the escape, and that's kind of where the e-collar fits in, positive punishment, which is also maybe in some places the e-collar is used, but not the way that I like to use it. And then negative punishment, which is a timeout. All right, so it just has to do, really, you need to focus on that there is a consequence. Either consequence is a reward or negative. And so that's kind of where we're going to be at in regard to the electronic collar in this discussion. And you're going to have to decide if it, for you, is it the thing that you're going to want to use for training your dog? All right. So let me first tell you that I've been on both sides of the fence with in regard to electronic collars. Back at Anaheim Police Department, back in the day, there was a movement because there were so many lawsuits happening in regard to dogs biting, and they're still out today. I just did a video on the other day where the guy couldn't get his dog off the bite. But back during this period of time, there was I think Geraldo Rivera had on his show at the time had done a whole hour, half hour, however long the show was back in the day, all on how police dogs were punishing suspects by biting them and not letting go and ripping and tearing their skin, that kind of stuff. And so there was this huge thing. We wanted police dogs to be in service because we thought they were useful tools because of their nose and that kind of stuff. They were great protectors and were able to catch people that were running. We're carrying around, an extra 100 pounds of equipment on our bodies, yet the dog is not and can run at about 25 miles an hour, thereby catching a suspect who's running with no shirts, no shirt on, in shorts and in running shoes. And so the dog was a better tool for catching those people. And so we found that the dogs were useful, and then we began using them in SWAT deployments, that kind of stuff. And so we didn't want to lose the use of the dogs. Lose the use of the dogs in law enforcement. And so people began to panic. LAPD at the time was using electronic collars. There's a guy by the name of Don Yarnell who really began to use a lot of electronic collars. He later would get, the story is that something bad happened, and then he ended up getting, and the story goes that he got let go. So I'm not going to get into it because I don't know all the facts. So I started to go somewhere where I kind of know, but I'm not 1,000% sure what ended up happening. Anyway, it didn't end well, according to my resources. So, but the electronic collar was his big thing, right? And so the Anaheim Police Department, our chief at that time had come from LA County. He came from Alhambra. A lot of people looked towards LAPD and LA County Sheriff as the place to go for information. And so our chief at the time felt that since LAPD was using electronic collars, well, then Anaheim must. We didn't have a lot of bites that were going on where there was any controversy. We weren't in the news or anything like that. But just one day he decided that every one of our police dogs was going to be on the electronic collar. Now, back in the day, I'll try to keep this short. Back in the day, you had the collar. Oh man, I lost my TV. What happened? Farfignugan. Oh, darn it. So sorry about that. So I was going to go to my TV here. Maybe it'll come back on while I'm talking. And I see what happened. My phone timed out. So the picture timed out. Let's see if we can get it back. So there we go. And so let me turn it sideways. So it gets, there we go. And so unlike this collar here, where the remote, you can turn up the strength with this dial here, the collar itself had different colored pins. So there'd be red pins, blue pins, green pins, yellow pins, and they each represented a different level. So let's say, and I can't remember exactly, I don't think I have any pictures here that show that system. No, I didn't bring up any of those. So let me just go back to the picture I have here. So a red pin was the highest, and let's just say the green pin, I think it was the lowest. It might have been orange, but whatever it was. So you had the red and you had the green, and then you had the colors in between, right? So based on your dog's pain tolerance, based on whatever the distraction is, based on wherever your dog's level of fight, whether he's biting or not, or doing obedience. So that being obedience would be 0 in regard to fight. In the middle of biting a decoy on a sleeve or a bite suit, then they were at this level, right? So the level of the colored pins would be based on whatever it was you're doing. And so what ended up happening, this is a Dogster. Thanks, Doug. And so the handler, if he was doing bite work, he put in let's say the orange and red pins based on his dog's pain tolerance, so that when he was working on the out, the level of the electronic stimulation would be high enough so the dog would actually feel it. And then when you said let go and push the button, the dog would actually let go. But you wouldn't want that on in obedience, because the dog's pain tolerance is not up. He's actually lessened and he's more focused. And so the last thing you want on the collar is a red one. You'd want somewhere in the neighborhood of a green or a blue, which is a lower level. All right. So, but they were just sharp jumps from one to the next. There wasn't this gradual uptick as you went up the level. It was like blue was one level, and then the next one, and then right. It was big, huge jumps. So back in the day when they ordered all of us at Anaheim Police Department to put those collars, and then it was Tritronics that we were using then. Right away, I found that my dog stopped working. He was completely disoriented. He hated it because we didn't know well enough sometimes to change. We were busy doing bite work, and then we go straight to obedience, leaving the red pin on. And here we are trying to do obedience with a red pin electronic collar, and the dog's going, his neck is tweaking because of the electronic stimulation, is causing the constriction of his muscles, and it causes a huge problem in what it is that we are trying to accomplish, because now the dog can't concentrate or even understand why it's so painful during obedience. When if we just communicated better, the dog would understand what was happening to him. So I'm going to come back to all this in just a minute. So I began to hate the electronic collar, not this one, but the ones we were using, because I can see that it was damaging all of our dogs. We weren't properly trained. We were just simply ordered to put the collars on, and we were simply ordered just use them and figure it out, right? And we're busy trying to be cops. We're going on calls. We're coming from a completely different place of training back then, which was, hitting a dog with a stick, cattle prods. That was our training that we were getting at the time. And now we're given this tool that some guys in our detail were just simply like what we would call frying their dogs with the electronic collar. And so what I did, I made sure that my collar was never charged. So I never really used it, because I thought it was a very abusive, horrible type of tool to be used at that time. And it was, I thought. And so I swore I would never use an electronic collar. That was back in 90, I think, about 89, 90, somewhere around there. And so I swore I would never use it. So now fast forward, I become a trainer for not only police departments, but for pet dogs and for service dogs and that kind of stuff. So 4 or 5 years later, I have this customer. She is, I want to say osteoporosis or something like that, or something where she was slowly, her muscles and her bone structure were slowly deteriorating. She had a golden retriever that was about 80 pounds. And as she became weakened by her disease, the dog got stronger, and the dog got older, because when she got the dog, it was a puppy. But as she was weakening, the dog was growing, and now the dog was knocking her down and just kept licking her face, and she wasn't able to get up. Because she was so weak and could not do that. So she calls our office and says, I have this dog that I love, but he's killing me. He knocks me down. He's licking my face, and I don't know. I need help. And so I go to Anaheim, where she was, and meet her. And I'm challenged, because the typical types of training techniques that we use, which would be a leash and collar, maybe even food and clicker and that kind of stuff, none of those are possible, because she has very limited use of her hands, and her timing is not going to be great because of the disease that she has. And so I'm racking my brain. How is it that now I can train the dog, right? But I give the dog back, and the dog goes right back to what it knows with her, because he knows that this happens when I jump on her, she falls down, I can lick her in the face, right? That is the reward. The reward is that when I jump on her, she falls, and now I'm right there face to face with her, and then she turns her head and fights back, and this kind of feeds into the dog's stimulation, and so the dog is self-rewarding by knocking her down. So it wouldn't matter whether I can train the dog to be obedient and not jump on me, but the dog, once I leave 2-3 days later, is going to go right back to knocking her down. All right. So how do I give her more power? How do I help her? And the answer was the electronic collar. After I swore it off as a police officer, now I'm coming back and saying, the only thing I can think of, can you push a button? Yes, that's what I do all day. When I'm in my wheelchair, I can push the button to move forward. I push the button to move back. I push the forward to turn right, left. I can push the button. I know how to do that. And I said, well, electronic collar looks like it's going to be the solution. So now, instead of just giving her the collar, instead of what Anaheim Police Department did at the time, again, I'm not saying they were bad. They didn't know any better, right? They just figured, well, LAPD is using it. Here's the collars, use them, right? Figure it out, right? Instead of me doing that to her, here's electronic collar, figure it out. I began to study and learn, and I immersed myself in electronic collar training so that I could help this one customer, right? It cost me thousands of dollars and hours of training to help a customer that was paying me, a couple $100. But I felt that the knowledge I was going to gain from learning how to use it properly, that it was going to be another one of those tools that when I needed it, I would know how to use it. And I think that's one thing that's lost with some people that I have to deal with as far as employees and things like that, that they don't understand the value of immersing yourself into something to learn something. Even if it's going to cost you money, in the end, it's going to be something you can use later and find life-changing. All right, so I find out the Dobbs are the people I go to, one of the people I go to, and learn how to use it effectively. And I find out that I'm transformed. I'm transformed to say, oh man, it went away again. Farfing Nugan. I got to figure out how to do this better. Oh, it's still on. It's my phone that's cutting out. And so now, 5 years later, 6 years later, now they have this. They have a remote where you can control the levels and turn it up and down from the remote. You no longer have to change the pins. The pins are solid. They stay, and they are not removable. I mean, you can take them out if you have a longer fur dog and a shorter fur dog, but as far as having to change them out to do anything, no longer. It is water resistant at the time. I think now they're waterproof. And you have what's called a NIC, where it gives a real quick stimulation. And you have another one, you hold it, and the electronic stimulation stays on for 8 seconds, then automatically shuts off. And then you have farther range, and then you have what's called a pulse. When you hit it, it actually vibrates, and you can use that as either a signal or a pet of sorts, right? You're telling the dog that he's doing something right. So all these features completely changed how the collar was used, and it was different than how I was using it or what I had available to me at the time as a police officer. All right, so we have all these options now. So I learned that what you need to do is start at low levels. What we were doing and what we often do in everything, right? We often, especially men, we go to high levels. Women, not as much, but I know plenty of women who they just want to, turn at the 10 and hit the button. But, or with a pinch collar, use 2 hands and use all your muscle that you have in your body to give a correction. If you're going to any of those extremes, you are not using any tool correctly. If you can't find a way to use the lowest level of the correction, which I'm going to talk about in a second. If you can't use the lowest level of correction to get a starting point with your dog, then you're not using it properly. You've not been trained properly, and you are not using it as effectively as you possibly can. Because there's a point with anything that if you go too far, the learning stops, because now the thing itself becomes the focus as opposed to the behavior you're trying to train. All right. So in the sense of the electronic collar, because now we have these dials, you can change it based on whatever the distraction level is. So in obedience, in a very quiet area where there's no squirrels, no cats, no kids, no noise, you can be at somewhere in the 1 or 2 level. Depending on the electronic collar, they go from 1 to 10, 1 to 100, 1 to 50. So just know I'm going to talk about just like, let's do 1 to 10, just because it's easier. So you can stay at a 1 or maybe even a 2 when you are doing something with electronic collar at a lower level, and that's where, in most cases, you should be able to start. All right, so now let's really quickly, just for a brief moment, talk about bark collars. Bark collars may be the most effective tool on the planet for teaching your dog not to bark. All right, and I don't care who you are. I don't care what it is you tell me about your positive reinforcement life and that kind of stuff, your click and treat, whatever it is, all that stuff is fine, but the only thing that you can do to correct the dog when it's barking when you're not there is an electronic bark collar. Right? It is really the only thing that is available to you. You have the Centronella spray. You got these other things that are useful, but not nearly as effective as a bark collar. Right? A bark collar that stimulates, that sends out a electronic stimulus at the moment the dog barks, because it goes off the vibrations of the vocal cords of the dog, goes off at that moment, is the most powerful tool for training a dog not to bark when you're not home, or when you're asleep, or when you're inside your house and you're busy and your dog's in the backyard, or your dog's running around inside the house and you're busy doing something else. When the mailman comes, the electronic collar is going to correct the dog for the bad behavior at the moment, the very moment that he barks, and it is the most effective tool available. The problem is people turn them up too high to begin with, and that causes more problems than anything else. You cannot turn it up to the higher level, because something happens. To the point where the dog is now overstimulated, and now the dog thinks of something completely different than what you want to focus on, and that is that the bark caused the correction. My barking caused this little bit of a correction that I understand. Every time I bark, I feel this thing, right? And you need it to be at the lowest level that gets that message across. So if you have a barking dog, you start with the lowest level, right? and you make sure that you're around, so that when you hear your dog bark, you can hear whether he barks again, or he barks and yelps, or he whatever happens. You want to be close, but don't start off at a 6 or a 7, right? Because what will end up happening is the dog will bark, and then he'll yelp, and then he'll wince, and all those things cause vibrations, which causes it to go off again. And now this dog is getting 3, 4 electric stimulations at this higher level, because he's reacting to the collar going off, as opposed to the dog just barking and getting a low level stimulation. So in regard to a bark collar, when you decide to get a bark collar, you're going to start off at a 1 or a 2. You're going to be present. And so make sure and don't use it unless you can be present to hear what the dog's reaction is when he barks. Does he go bark? And then the bark becomes short, because now you guys say, what the heck was that? Right. And then the dog may, and often does, bark a second time. Bark. And now in most cases, that's it. Right. If your dog barks and then barks again, then your level is too low. Right. And so then you kick it up to 3. Right? If you're at a 1 or a 2, say you're at a 2 and your dog barks and he barks again, then you know that you need to turn the stimulation up to a 3. If the dog barks and he barks again, then you know you need to turn the stimulation up to 4. Or you go to examine the collar, maybe it's not on snug enough, right? And so that's the other requirement of an electronic collar, is that both the prongs are touching the skin at the same time, or else you're not going to get the electronic stimulation that you're looking for, right? If you're only one of them then you're going to get nothing. And it has to have both, because it causes the arc that gives you the stimulation. Now, this sounds all terrible and horrible. I know. I'm going to come back to that in a moment. But I'm going to tell you right now that the Dogtra bark collar, the Tritronics bark collar, there's a couple others that are made well, that when you have it on correctly and you start with a lower stimulation, that it is the most effective thing to teaching a dog not to bark when you are asleep or when you're not home. Now, the Dogtra or the Tritronics, no bark collar should be on the dog 24 hours a day. It should only be on during that period of time that you don't want the dog to bark. So during the time of sleep, during the time that you're not home. If you're leaving for a couple days, unfortunately, you're going to have either somebody come and put the collar on and take it off when you're not home, or you take the dog to a boarding facility and you have the dog stay in a boarding facility. You cannot keep if you're going to leave for 3 days and you put the dog in the backyard with water and have somebody that, hey, could you come feed my dog? You can't keep the bark collar on for 3 days. You're going to come back and there's going to be irritation, there's going to be infection, and it's going to be really, really bad, because you have these 2 prongs rubbing on the dog's neck. Now that's abuse. Now that is inhumane, and now you're not doing the right thing. Having it on during the periods of time when the dog should not bark, when you're asleep for 6 hours, 7 hours, and examining to make sure you're not causing irritation and injury, and doing that and being a good dog owner is the correct thing to do, right? What happens if you don't have the bark collar, right? If you just give up and say, well, he can bark when I'm not there, you get complaints from your neighbors, you get animal control, the dog gets taken from you, the dog has to go away, and you have greater problems, right? By putting the bark collar on and only using it how it should be used, you can save, from having angry neighbors. You can keep your dog, and as long as you use it well, the dog will understand. The dog will probably not bark as long as the collar is on, right? That is the power of this particular tool, that the dog will not bark when it's on. Right. In some cases, you can teach the dog to not bark during those hours, but in most cases, it's one of those things you're going to have to put on the dog, and then he understands when that's on, I can't bark. Right. And that's just the way that it is. All right. So let's go back just really quick to this slide here. And that is that operant conditioning one. You go. And the important thing to understand here is that the behavior is controlled by consequences. If there's no consequence, then how does the dog supposed to know that he's not supposed to do it, right? So you quite often have dogs that don't bark as long as a human being is home, but when they leave, the dog has learned that when they're not home, when the human beings aren't home, there's no consequence, right? And so the dogs learn very quickly that when they're home, there's consequence. When they're not home, there is no consequence. So how do you do that? How do you correct the dog when you're not home? Well, it's the bark collar, and that is the best way to do that. And again, it may be the thing that saves you from having to give your dog up because they've upset the neighbors so much. All right, now let's go to a remote collar. Now, the remote collar, how is it possible that something so evil in some people's minds can actually be the most humane tool available? Well, it is there. It's simple, right? Not right, but it's simple. And I'm going to tell you why. If you didn't know this, food training in many cases is more misused and inappropriately used than people will even think. I've seen it, unfortunately, where many detection dogs are trained with food. The dogs cannot eat unless they're finding something. All right. Now that is, I believe, cruel and unusual punishment. That the dogs often are started training. This happens in a facility in Florida that I know about, that they will not feed the dogs for 5 to 7 days, then begin the dog's training. And then from that point on, the dog does not eat. At least the directions are the dog does not eat unless the dog is finding something. So every day the dog has to work for his food. There's nothing more inhumane, I think, than that. Those dogs never look happy. They look like they're stressed. And food-based systems can cause stress in dogs beyond what you even believe that can happen. I have seen it. I've been in environments where it's been used, and I can physically see that dogs that are sometimes food reward trained are more stressed, not as happy as dogs that are trained using some of these other methods, even the electronic collar. So if you're using something that the dog understands that if I don't find that, I'm not going to eat, right? If that was our daily life, that if every day, and it kind of is, right? We have to work. And if we lose our job, that becomes stressful. We know that feeling. If we lose our job, we can't feed ourselves. We can't feed our families, right? That's stressful. Imagine a dog who doesn't understand that, wow, it seems to me that the only time I eat is when I do this thing. And over time, this can be very, very stressful, that you're withholding food, the very thing that the dog knows that keeps him alive. You're withholding it until he performs or does something. That can be a very stressful situation for a dog. So understand that when we talk about, usually when we're talking about people to do positive reinforcement, is that we almost go to food somehow, that's what they're using. And people think, well, they're just using food. They're not using any harmful corrections. And so it must be more humane. If you're not using a correction, it must be better. No, if you're withholding food and not giving them food unless they perform, it's very stressful and very, a very painful thing. And I don't say that in the means of physical, but it's a very painful thing mentally for the dog to go through, him thinking that if I don't perform, I'm not going to eat. And how do I know this? Is because I've seen it. I've been doing this for 30 years. I've seen dogs that are food-based trained dogs that are very stressed. I can see it in their body. I've seen some, and I can show you a video. I don't have it up and running right now. And I'm not sure I can show it because I'm not sure if it'll give away who it is on the video. But at some point, I'll find that video and I'll show you parts of it. And you'll see a very stressed dog. I just hate to bring it up without making sure that I can. But I just know that I have it, and at some point I'll show it. All right. So is anybody that's watching this and wants to remind me somewhere in a comment or a posting on Falco Canine Academy's Facebook page, hey, I want to see that video of that dog, and I'll show you. It's a food-based dog. Everything. Oh, he's food-based, and we don't use any corrections. It's the most stressed dog. It's a Labrador Retriever. Tail's not wagging. Tail's almost between his legs as he's being commanded to search. It's a horrible, horrible video, and that is a reward-based system. All right. So the next thing, we have pinch collars and choke chains, right? Pinch collars and choke chains, if you use them correctly, they can be very good tools, but used incorrectly, which was a two-handed correction, lifting the dog up off the ground by his neck, or to the point where the dog tightens it up so where he's choking, all is, of course, bad. We know that. And that's why we teach you at Falco Canine Academy how to use a choke chain properly, or a training collar properly, or how to use a pinch collar properly, how to put it on properly, because it's important to know those things, that when you use it right, it actually can be very, very effective and can be way more humane when you use it right than if you use it wrong. When you use it wrong, any of these tools can be bad. Gentle leaders. In its name, it's saying, oh, it's a gentle leader. Oh, no, gentle leaders actually cause more damage to the dog's neck than any of the tools that I'm telling you right now, and can cause some serious injuries if you don't use it correctly. And on a dog who doesn't understand it, who fights against it, can be injured very quickly with a gentle leader. And so all of those require pressure. It requires you to do something physically. And if you are, older, or you have some physical limitations, they then all have their limitations. An electronic collar like this one can actually be way more humane because there's no physicality to it. And if you're using it at a lower level, it's given a small dose of electronic stimulation, which when we think about it, we're thinking, oh, I hate being shocked, right? When you touch something, when you're trying to do some wiring in your house, how you hate that. And that's why we think it's so bad. Or as a child, I remember my brother used to rub his feet on the carpet and touch me and shock me. And it used to hurt. And so my memory goes that electricity is bad. Well, when you use it correctly, the way that this is supposed to be used, and I use the Constant and not the NIC. There's other electronic training facilities that use the NIC. I use the Constant stimulation. So I'm going to give you a couple examples. This is not meant to be a training on how to use the electronic collar necessarily. It's meant to explain why I think that the electronic collar can be the most humane training tool available when used correctly. Is where I'm coming from, is that when you have a very low level and the dog is at a distance, you have a long line on the dog and you have it on a 2, for instance, and the dog is at a distance and you want to train the dog that being with me is safe, right? Always coming back to me is safe. Is that when you have it on a 2 and you hit that constant stimulation, the dog can feel it because you can see him kind of looking around like, where's that feeling coming from? That's kind of what the look you get from the dog, is that when you push that button, the dog will go, where's that feeling coming from? And then when you pull the dog towards you and he comes next to you, you take your thumb off and now the stimulation stops. It's very quickly the dog realizes that when I'm at a distance and I feel the stimulation, when I come back to mom or dad, it goes away, right? And you want it at a level the dog can make that connection. If you go too high and are in a 6, the dog's going, shit, what's happening? Or shoot, sorry. My 9-year-old daughter's here watching me. Shoot. Remember I said shoot. You push that button, the dog, what is this? And the dog's like confused. And you bring it back to me and you bring the dog back to you and you release. The dog is now so confused because the stimulation was so high. The dog cannot make that connection. That's why you want to make sure that you use the lower stimulation on the remote. Make sure that it's dialed down so that when you're teaching the dog how to control the collar is what you're doing, right? You're teaching the dog that he's in control of that feeling on his neck. And so when he feels that feeling and he consciously can understand that I feel something on my neck that I really don't particularly like, how do I turn that thing off, right? Maybe he's not thinking that in the beginning. Later on he will, or she will, that he's at a distance 4 or 5 feet away. He feels the stimulation. The dog goes, I know what to do. I go back to mom or dad. Dog comes back to mom or dad, and the stimulation goes away. The dog goes, now I understand. So all I have to do is listen for them to say here, because you're going to be bringing in the verbal command later on. So dogs, you now say here, the dog doesn't respond. You push the stimulation. The dog comes back. You turn it off. Now the dog will make the connection that command. I need to listen to that command here, because if I don't listen to that command here, I feel this thing on my collar, and the only way I can turn it off is by returning to dad. Right. So now you've got that. That's phase 2. Now you say here, you wait, you see what the dog does. The dog goes, oh, shoot. You now see the dog coming towards you, but the dog goes, I didn't feel that stimulation. The dog stops about halfway. You push down the stimulation. The dog finishes coming to you. Now you release. Right. That's phase 3. The dog is at a distance. You say here, the dog starts to come back to you, and the dog goes, I didn't feel that thing after all. Oh, I feel that thing. And now I come back. So now you say here, the dog comes back. Now there's no stimulation. The dog goes, I know what I have to do. I simply have to listen to the command. When dad or mom says here, when I come to their side, I don't even have to feel that stimulation. The dog now feels that they're in complete control of that collar because now they understand. I don't have to go through the feeling of that thing on my neck as long as I listen to what it is they say. And now you have a dog that's trained in that behavior, at least the beginning stages of being trained in that behavior. And now you repeat it over and over again for 4 to 6 weeks, and now it becomes a trained behavior. All right. So you can see when you use low stimulation on electronic collar like this one, and you use it correctly, that there's no power, right? You're not having to correct the dog towards you, and the dog understanding that that correction means that I'm supposed to come back to you, because the correction is only happening once out there. As opposed to the electronic collar, the continuous stays constant until the dog responds completely to what it is that you're commanding the dog to do. And you can see how more clear when you use it in a way that is helpful to the dog, that it's black and white. The dog understands. I feel that until I complete the entire task. So once you've trained that where the dog comes to you in a low level that the dog can understand, now what you do is train the dog to go away from you, because pretty soon that electronic stimulation will simply mean one thing. I come back to mom or dad, and that's it, right? So now you have to teach the dog to go away. What are some of the things that dogs like to go to? They like to go to their food bowl. They like to go, oftentimes, most dogs that are crate trained like to go into their crates. Many dogs like to go into a car. So now what you can do is you can train the dog to go away from you on stimulation. So now you can use, a crate is the easiest one for me, because many of the dogs that we train are crate trained. Is that, and you can also put food inside the crate. You can now have the dog next to your side, and you can say, crate. You now push the button when the dog is next to you. The dog's going, what the hell? I am next to you. Why am I feeling the stimulation? Now you lead the dog to the crate. The dog gets close enough now that he goes inside, and you release the stimulation. If a dog is having trouble, you may want to wait until the dog puts his first paw in, and then you release the stimulation. So the dog at least knows I have to touch the crate. Then you can continue this until the dog puts both paws in the crate, then 3 paws in the crate, and then entirely gets in, and then you release the stimulation. So it can take a little bit longer to go to get the go to wait part of it. And so now what you want the dog to now learn, now there's 2 commands I have to listen to. One is to come. If I don't come all the way, then I'm going to feel stimulation. Now, when he says crate, I'm supposed to go away. And now you increase distance from the crate as the dog learns to go inside. And now the dog learns, when he says crate, I'm supposed to go away from the human being. So now the dog has both, right? What's next? The next one is stay, right? So now the dog, both those are movements. Now you're going to train the dog to stay. So you tell the dog to stay, sit and stay. When the dog lifts his butt, he gets stimulation until he puts his butt down, right? And then you release. When the dog, you say stay, the dog sits, stay. Now you begin to move away. The dog begins to follow. You give stimulation. You take the dog back where he was. Super important. You put the dog back in that sit position where he was, and you release the stimulation, right? You say sit, stay. You begin to move away. The dog starts to get up. You see the dog put his butt back down. You don't have to give stimulation, right? You move away. The dog gets up. You push stimulation, put the dog back, and now the dog learns that I need to, when the human says here, I'm supposed to go to him or else I feel stimulation. When he says crate, I'm supposed to go away or else I'm going to feel stimulation. When he says stay, I need to stay in a sit, stay, or else I'm going to feel stimulation. When the dog learns that he's in complete control of the electronic collar, you have to use less stimulation, and less often do you have to use the stimulation, the button, right? And now you have a collar that's working for you without the extra pressure. What happens with physicality too, when we give hand corrections or physical, our voice often raises. So with an electronic collar, we don't have to raise our voices, which ends up happening in dog training a lot, because when we say sit and the dog doesn't sit, many human beings feel like they have to raise their voice. They sit, 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 and they get really loud, right? With the electronic collar, what's fantastic is in many cases, you can whisper the commands and the dog begins to learn, because dogs have very powerful hearing. So you just say sit and the dog doesn't do it, sit. And then you push the button, the dog sits and you release the button. And without having the physicality to it, it's even better for us, because now the physicality of having to give the correction doesn't call us to constrict our vocal cords and then have to speak up, and because it's a physical thing, right? We can stay completely neutral in our emotions. We can stay very calm, and all we have to do is push the button. That's what made it so useful for the lady that I had to work with who had the physical disability, that again, she didn't have the muscles in order to do something. She just simply had to push a button, and the collar did all the talking for her. So once we trained the dog now let's go back to her really quick. Once we trained the dog to understand the collar, I was able to give her the collar and leave. And the very same thing that I did, she was able to do with a push the button. She didn't need the physicality. She didn't need the timing. She didn't need anything. Well, timing is important, but I take that back. That she still needed to push the button, but it still had the same results. That the stimulation was the same, right? The feeling was the same, whether it was coming from me or not. With leash corrections, my leash corrections feel entirely different than my 9-year-old daughter when she's with a dog, right? My physical corrections for a dog with a leash and a collar is different than maybe even Gina or Derek or some of our other trainers. The timing is slightly different. The voice is different. But with an electronic collar, it's the same, as long as you're using the same level of stimulation. Jerry Litt. Hi, Andy. Think your concept works. As you know, some dogs come from a difficult background, and this may be the only way to help. Yes, very good point. Oh, I'm losing my thing. Yes, Jerry, very good. Exactly. I'm going to get to the differences between one dog and the next, but yes, this may be the only thing. There's many dogs that come to us, and Jerry, I believe, works at Orange County, German Shepherd Rescue of Orange County, and spends time there volunteering. And sometimes the history of the dog does not allow us to use one of those other collars, because they're so often used and abused. And so a pinch collar on a dog who's been abused by the pinch collar, when now we get them not knowing that history, we can tell pretty quickly though. We put a pinch collar dog, you see the dog begins to panic, he begins to salivate, he begins to pant. You can see that his eyes get a little bit bigger as soon as you put the pinch collar on. In that case, we can pretty much figure out that whatever the experience this dog has with the pinch collar, it's been bad, right? And so the training tool for that dog will not be the pinch collar because the dog has a bad experience. If we put an electronic collar on the dog and we get that same feeling or that same look from that dog, then we know the electronic collar has probably been used in an abusive way. And so now we can't use electronic collar. We now have to find another way. And that may be food. That may be some other tool like a flat collar or a martingale or something like that. So based on the dog's history, and Jerry is exactly right, that in some cases, electronic collar is the perfect thing because it often takes the physicality of having to use a leash and a collar combination in order to get the dog to do something. But now we can stay calm and we can say, sit. And dog goes, I don't want to sit. I need you to sit, dog. And the dog's not doing it. And then we just simply give stimulation. We find a way to get the dog into the sit position. We release the stimulation. And in some cases, you can use two people, right? Somebody's operating the remote, somebody's operating the dog. And we help the dog understand by putting him in the position that turns off the collar, right? And so we can do this all in a calm place because the electronic collar allows us to be calm. Now, when do we need to bring up the level to a higher level? So most of this training should take place in the beginning in a very quiet, calm place where you don't have any distractions, because you want the dog to understand how to control the collar. You want the dog to do it in a place where he can concentrate, not looking at other dogs. In many cases, if your dog has a dog aggression or human aggression or things going on, you want to set the stage and make sure the dog understands how to control the collar without those things. That's the one problem with the electronic collar being sold at Petco, PetSmart, some of the other places that you can get them online, right? You have it mailed to you, is that you don't get any of this training, right? People think, I want to stop my dog from going after small dogs on my walk. So they put the collar on, they turn it to 7, they fry the dog when the small dog comes by. Now what have you done? You've now associated with that small dog not only the things that it hated about that dog to begin with, whether it changed your behavior as the handler, whatever that thing was, but now the dog can perceive that dog is causing my collar to hurt me, right? So now the dog hates that little dog even more, because you did not set the stage for the dog to understand that the collar is controlled by me, the dog, right? The dog is thinking, I control this collar because I just went those 3 stages with my human being. They've taught me that when I say here, I can turn it off. When I go away, I can turn it off. When I stay, I can turn it off. The dog understands I'm the one who's controlling this collar. Now you take the dog into the environment that which you originally got the collar for, because now he understands how it works. Where if you do it the other way, where you just put it on only for that one thing and then try to turn it up to get the dog to stop, the dog is only stopping because he probably thinks he's going to die, because now you're getting up to those levels where its neck is constricted, the muscles are constricted, and it's so painful that the dog has no choice but to stop. But he's not stopping because he understands why. He's only stopping because it's so painful. So you want the dog to understand that I can stop it when I don't do the thing that I'm not supposed to do, that I'm talking for the dog, I'm in control of the collar. So once you've trained the dog the basics, right, so the dog understands the collar, now you bring a dog at a great distance, whatever that distance is that causes the dog to first react. So let's just say it's 100 feet, right? So that's at 100 feet, the dog now begins to breathe heavy, right? Your dog, who's dog aggressive. The dog begins to breathe heavy. The dog begins to stand up a little bit taller. The ears, point towards wherever the dog is. The dog's tail begins to rise. We call that flagging. Whatever those physiological changes are in the dog, at the distance where that first starts happening is now where you train the dog not to do that. You don't bring the dog up to his face and wait till the dog goes, and then try to hit the stimulation. Remember, we're trying to teach the dog what he's not supposed to do. And you can only do that where the dog can think, right? When the dog's too close and now he's getting electronic stimulated at the same time, the dog cannot think. So you have to start with the dog at 100 feet. I'm just using that as an example. It could be more for your dog or it could be less. That's where you now give the dog stimulation and then tell him to do something, right? When you are walking and you have this set up properly and the dog appears from 100 feet away, you see your dog's tail come up, you see him begin to stand up, you hear him breathing faster, you give the stimulation and you say sit or you say down, right? You give an obedience command to whatever that body language he's giving you that he's becoming stimulated by another dog. The moment you see they say down and you give stimulation, the dog downs and the dog stops the flagging, stops the panting and turns his attention towards you, you release the stimulation, right? Now you walk away, right? Now you say heel and you walk away and then you start to come back. You come within that range. The dog's tail flags down. The dog lays down, looks at you, you release stimulation. And what you're going to learn is that you can now begin to get closer and closer because the dog's going at 100 feet. When I begin to flag, when I begin to breathe heavier, I feel that thing, and I don't want that to happen. So now you get to 95 feet before the flagging starts and the breathing starts. You go down and you heel back away, right? You now get to 80 feet. The flagging starts, the breathing changes. Down. The dog looks at you. You go away. You come back into that zone. Pretty soon you're able to now to go jump by 10 feet to 15 feet. And now you're up to, now you're at 30 feet before the dog begins to react, because the dog's beginning to learn, hey, when I do that thing, I get the stimulation and I get taken away, right? The dog is now not only getting stimulation, but he's losing ground, right? The dog doesn't like to do that either. So now you begin to get closer and closer and closer, and you're only going as far as you can go to where the understanding is still present. When you go too far too fast, and you get the dog go crazy, and you're frying and you're turning it up and that kind of stuff, you've gone too far. Now you need to completely back up and start again, right? And you will get it, right? And in most cases, you will get it, right? So that's how you deal with a dog in regard to the thing that you probably originally got the collar for. I got it because I wanted to help my dog through his dog aggression. You have to do these other things first, right? And what'll end up happening, you have a better relationship with your dog, because now you're doing more with your dog, and it's easier for the dog to understand because you're not having all this pressure and power and yanking and pulling and downing and yelling and screaming, because this allows you to be a little bit more calm. All right, I'm not doing a sales job. You don't have to get electronic collar, right? And you don't have to buy an electronic collar. This is not a sales pitch. This is just telling you the facts of life. And what's that song? What's the name of that show? The Facts of Life. Da-da-da-da. I wish I had that in my head. Sorry, I digress. Sorry. My daughter's looking at me like I'm very confused. All right. So now, when have we not used electronic collar? Well, we've not used it on dogs who have a complete aversion to feeling this electronic stimulation. There are dogs I've had, German Shepherds, big, strong ones. You put the collar on and you start to figure out where this dog's level is at, because you have to find that out with each dog, because it's different depending on the dog. It has to do, they say, with water content. It has to do with, the pain tolerance of the dog. There's a lot of things that have to do, because all of us, some people get reactions to bee stings, some people don't. Some people have a big reaction to electronic stimulation, other people don't, right? And so every dog is different, just the same. And so there are dogs, when they feel a level 1, they completely freak out. You need to stop right now, and that the electronic collar is probably not going to be for that dog. Labrador Retrievers seem to do really well on electronic collar for whatever reason. They're just fun-loving, easygoing kind of dogs. Dogs that have high stress levels, like Doberman Pinschers, can sometimes have problems with electronic collars because they're so nervous to begin with. You're adding something that makes them even more nervous, and it's really sometimes hard with them. I've seen some great work done with Doberman Pinschers with electronic collars, but I'm just giving you some examples of when electronic collar may not be good for a dog. If you have a dog that has a strong reaction to the lowest levels of electronic collars, like runs and tries to go underneath the car because it doesn't understand what's happening to them, you may either, you can take your time and maybe get the dog to feel a little bit more comfortable with it. And you may get through with it. But in many cases, if a dog has that strong a reaction, it's probably going to be difficult to do. One last thing, as I'm reminded here, and I wish I had an electronic collar right now in my hands. It's probably one of my cupboards here. But what you want to do to introduce the dog to the collar is that you want him to think it's a good thing before he thinks it's a bad thing. So one important thing, gosh, I wish I had any kind of collar right now, is that you have the collar at the highest. Oops, I have one of my emails pop up there. As you can see that this collar itself is plastic, and it's very strong and sturdy, and it has lots of holes for different size. Sorry, I'm not speaking on the mic. Different holes so that it'll fit onto a lot of different dogs with different size necks, right? So what you want to do in the beginning is go to the first or second hole on the collar and put the little chingadero through there so it's really big. And as you go to put on the dog, you put on the dog and you want to give him a treat. Right? Maybe the first 2 days, you just put the collar on, you give the dog a treat. You put the collar on, give the dog a treat. Pretty soon what you're going to find is you're going to hold that collar, the dog's going to put his head in there, and he's going to do it willingly, and because he knows when he does that, he gets a treat. That is a really good place to start with this electronic collar, is that you want to introduce the collar and make it a fantastic thing to the dog, right? Whatever that thing is, whether it's a hot dog or a liver treat or whatever it is, the most wonderful treat that dog loves is what you're going to give that dog for putting his neck through that collar, his head through that collar and onto his neck. At some point, you're going to put the collar on the dog, and then you're going to pull. And the reason you want it in a hole is because now you can pull the end of that collar, because it's being held by the little chingadero there, is you're going to pull on it, and now you're going to be able to tighten it up. And when you tighten it up, now you're going to get the dog to treat. And so you go on to the next stage, right? So you put the collar on the dog, give him a treat, you pull it tight, you give him a treat. You let the dog walk around with that electronic collar for a period of time with the electronic collar on and give him some treats. That is the best way to introduce this collar to the dog, because now you've made it a wonderful thing before you begin to use it as an electronic collar and set the stimulation, and it'll be less shocking to the dog when you begin to use it as a training tool. Oh, how did that happen? Oh, my son hit the button and it went to Netflix. You guys want to watch something on Netflix? No, we're gonna go back to the. Thank you, Ray. Here, let me go back to the collar. Hold on, I'm almost done, kids. You want to go where? Oh, thank you, buddy. Okay, you can go to Jacob and Jackie's. Screen mirroring. There we go. I got to get it back here. There we go. Okay, Bowie. Hold on 1 second. I'm almost done. All right, back to the collar. All right, so you're going to introduce the collar to the dog through treats. Make sure it's a fantastic thing first before you start using it as a negative thing. You're going to want to use low levels of stimulation to introduce the collar to the dog and to those three behaviors: come, leave, and stay. You are going to use one of the better collars, Doctra, Tritronics, and there may be one or two. Really, the Doctra right now is one of my favorites. I've not bought a new Doctra in a long time, or a new Tritronic, so I'm sure they're the two that compete a lot, and there's others. But you want to be careful. Michelle wants to watch Netflix instead. All right, so you don't want a flimsy collar, like a little nylon, little cheapy collar on your electronic collar, because what happens is those prongs. This is the dog's neck. These are the prongs. If it's not being held by a strong plastic collar, where those prongs are in constant contact with the skin, then what happens is that it rolls off, and this kind of thing happens. I'm not sure you can see that, where you can see that it comes off of the skin. Right? When it comes off the skin and you go to push the button, you're getting inconsistencies. Remember, dog training is best done when it's black and white. So if you have a collar that's really thin and flexible, you're going to get inconsistencies because it'll lose contact with the skin. And as you're pressing the button, or he's shaking his head, he's running, that kind of stuff, you're going to try to use it. It's not going to operate. Now the dog, you're going to say here, you're pushing the button, yet the dog's not feeling any stimulation. Now you have inconsistencies in the training. Make sure that your collar is a strong, solid plastic type collar that is firm and good. The Doctra and the Tritronics are very reliable. The stimulations are consistent. I've had some collars that I've tested the stimulation is inconsistent. 1 minute you push the button at a 2 and it feels more like a 5. The next minute you push the 2 and it feels like a 1 or a 0, right? And that is because the electronic part of it is not state of the art. They're using cheap, I want to say Korean, right? This collar, the Doctra, their company is very close by in, I believe they're in Torrance, California. So they're very close. Yeah, Narco is the best show. You just caused me to see a squirrel there, Michelle. Narco is the best show. And I talked about that at one of my other things. So Doctra, Tritronics, you want and you're going to pay a little bit more, but you're going to not have to replace it. These often come with, I think they're lifetime guarantees. And so anything goes wrong, you send it back to Doctra. They send you back either a new one or they fix whatever's wrong with it. And I think these really are the state-of-the-art, Tritronics and Doctra. And I'm sure there's one or two others out there that are really good. But at least these two I know very well, and I have no problem referring you to them. We sell them. So if you ever need one, make sure and just call us and we can get one shipped to you pretty quickly. And you can get a hold of it. And I don't think I missed anything. I usually have my agenda here, but I didn't put this one up. But I think I covered all the bases. So no, the electronic collar, when used correctly, actually can be the most humane out of all the techniques used for training a dog. Used incorrectly, it can for sure be one of the most inhumane, because the dog doesn't understand. You've turned the levels up too high and you're doing something that the dog completely does not understand, and you've stressed him out, and it's painful and it hurts and it sucks. And don't do that. If you leave the electronic collar on more than 6 to 8 hours a day, it could be bad for the dog, because now it's going to rub on the dog's neck. It's like a pinch collar. It's going to be rubbing on the dog's skin. It's going to cause lesions and injury, and they get infected, and it's really, really bad. So you can't do that either. So only use it during the times that you need that training to be done. Make sure you take it off when you don't need it for training. Make sure you get a good state-of-the-art collar so that it makes sense to the dog and you're fair to the dog. You make sure that your training is black and white. Make sure you introduce the collar to the dog so that he likes the collar. So you put it on for a couple of days using treats so that when he puts it on, he knows he gets something good. And be good to your dog. Spend time with your dog. Have an electronic collar and trying to get over some of his, some of the things that cause him to not be a good dog. Just use that time in a loving way, in a respectful way that makes a better connection. Anytime you're trying to fix something with your dog, you want to do it in a way that makes a bigger connection and doesn't separate you from your dog. Sorry, my son over here needs some training. Shh, 1 second, I'm almost done. And then there was one more point that I had, and now he caused me to forget it. Any questions before I leave? Michelle, Jerry, who else was on? I think Doug was on, Paul, Gina, she's probably back to training. Anybody else have anything that they want to know about the electronic collar? Again, I've been on both sides. So if there's people out there that say, "Oh, that is the worst tool, it's inhumane," I think there's countries that have outlawed. I think Germany has still outlawed electronic collars. I'm not sure if that's still right or not. Sounds like your son is barking. Yeah, he's barking. He's now sitting in a car seat in the garage. Yeah, there's some countries. I think Germany still has outlawed the electronic collar. It's because people were not using them correctly. They don't know. And there's many people just don't know, right? It's like, I was going to bring up illegal aliens. Like people are saying, oh, it's immigration's horrible. Being illegal is what is not good, right? And so you can have somebody talk about something over and over again, and it makes the thing horrible. Well, no, it's good that the United States has immigration laws, right? But it doesn't make us racist because we have immigration laws, right? It's how they're enforced and the wishy-washiness of it all. That's what makes it hard for people to understand. We're so wishy-washy. Well, we want these people unless they do something really bad. But then again, it's the wishy-washiness is what causes the confusion, causes anger, and causes protests and causes all this kind of stuff. It's the same thing with these tools, right? You just don't want to be wishy-washy. You want to use it in a way that is very sound, that is fair to the dog, respectful to the dog, and still makes that connection of love and respect. In any of those tools, including the electronic collar, including food, can be used in a manner to ruin a relationship, right? You want to make sure, and as a matter of fact, love used in the wrong way can ruin a relationship where all you're giving is love, but you're not giving respect, right? I just want to love you. I want to love you. What I can't think of the cartoon. There's a cartoon where the person's like hugging and kissing. All right, I know you love me, but now it's too much. All right, I've had enough. You're not respecting my space. You're not respecting who I am as a human being. Love can be bad. It can. It can in too much form, right? Hey, buddy, come here. Oh, you don't have a shirt on again. Every time I try to bring you on, you don't have a shirt on. Oh my gosh. All right. So all the tools correctly are good tools. Yes, when you use them right. Thank you, Patty. All right. I hope that was helpful to you in understanding a little bit more about electronic collar. Again, this isn't a video to encourage you to electronic collar. If you want to take the time to use it right and take the time and take the steps. I'm sure there's possibly something I missed along the way. So if you have any questions, get a hold of us and get a hold of one of our trainers, and maybe we can take you through a little bit of a course on doing that. But I pretty much went through the basics. There's lots of videos on the internet. The instructions that these tools come with are horrible. Even my favorites, Dogtra and Tritronics. Oh, we're back to Netflix again. Even, did you push the button? No. If you are thinking you're going to get some great tips and training on how to use the collar from them, you're not. I still don't think that they have any really good resources for using their own tool, which I think is a mistake. And I've tried to talk to some of these people on occasion and say, you really need to have something more that shows people how to use these things, because they buy them from Petco or PetSmart. They take them home, they turn them to 7, and they start shocking their dog, thinking they're going to fix something when in fact they're making their problem worse. So you're not going to get that from them. You're not going to get there. They don't come with a really good booklet. The booklet shows you how to turn it on, how to charge it, what buttons do what, and how to go up and down the levels of stimulation. And that is about it. There's some basics, but it doesn't address, the person who got the collar because their dog bit their next door neighbor's kid, right? Or bit their next door neighbor's dog, right? It's they don't have tools for that. You have to set the groundwork first before you can probably get to the thing that you bought the collar for, right? You have to set the stage so the dog understands what's happening before you can work on that thing that you're trying to fix. All right, that is it. Thank you all for joining me. Patty, Jerry, Michelle, I didn't put Patty's beautiful picture up there with her her comment. And I didn't miss anybody else. Doug. He asked if it was that early one. Was it? Oh, well, not now, but the dog trail was the one that I was showing. And Paul and Gina, and that's it. All right, guys. Thank you for joining me. I know it's a Saturday. I know it's in the middle of the day, and I know that it's in the middle of our training. So those of you that are going to watch the replay, please, please, please make sure and leave a comment about what you thought about the training. If you disagree, if you think that I'm full of caca, whatever it is that you think, please put it in there. If you like these videos, I really would love it if you would hit the 5 stars on our Facebook page. Just hit the 5 stars. And then if you feel like it, put a comment, hey, today's training was good, or whatever that is. I would just appreciate some movement on the rating of our Facebook page. That would be great, and the content you're getting. Would love to have some stars on there, for people to see that this is a good place to be. That whether you agree with what I say or not is not really the point. That the content that you're getting causes you to think, right? Maybe you go, well, I'm not convinced. I still don't think the electronic collar is a humane tool, right? All right, then now I know. All right, and so I would love comments, but if you can at least give us some 5 stars, make sure and subscribe. That way you get notified anytime we're on. That would be great. And if you want to share this, I saw that Jerry put somebody's name on there, and Stacy Davies, just to make sure that maybe she was watching. That's great stuff. Make sure and forward this to your friends that have dogs or were thinking about getting an electronic collar. This may be a posting that they would like to see. So share it with your friends and send it in either Messenger or onto their timeline. That would be great too. All right. I appreciate that very much. Thank you again for joining us. And if there's anything you want to know about in regard to the dog training, I'm almost through my 10 most frequently asked questions. So this give me some more content that we can talk about. All right. That is it. I will talk to you later. Take care. Bye.